A state that owns a river it can't touch. A city that legally sits in 2 time zones simultaneously, and residents can't agree which one is real. A limestone shelf so hollow beneath your feet that the whole western half of the state is essentially a drum. You won't believe number 27. Today, 40 facts about Kentucky that sound fake but are 100% real. Fact 1. There's a county in Kentucky where the county seat is physically unreachable from the rest of the county by land, without crossing into Tennessee first. McCreary County's courthouse sits in Whitley City, but certain parts of the county can only be reached by driving through a neighboring state. The state line isn't a border, it's a forced detour. Entire communities have been administratively stranded for over a century. Fact 2. Kentucky owns the Ohio River, but not a single inch of its banks on the north side. The river's southern shoreline belongs to Kentucky, but the water itself was awarded to it by a Supreme Court ruling based on a river that no longer flows where it did in 1792. Kentucky's border was drawn from the memory of a river, not its actual course. Ohio's riverfront cities sit in a state that legally starts in the water beneath their feet. Fact 3. A Kentucky town called Rabbit Hash has elected a dog as mayor since 1998. But here's the part nobody mentions. The town sits in a flood zone so severe it has been partially washed away 3 times. Yet residents keep rebuilding in exactly the same footprint. The mayor has changed, the dogs win. The floods win harder. Fact 4. There is a geological formation in western Kentucky where the land resonates. Early settlers reported hearing low-frequency hum from the ground during certain weather conditions. It's not mythological. It's the sound of air moving through thousands of unmapped sinkholes beneath the surface. The earth here breathes. You are not standing on solid ground. You are standing on a lid. Fact 5. Kentucky has more miles of navigable waterways than any state except Alaska. Not more than Florida. Not more than Louisiana. Alaska. The state most people picture as landlocked contains enough internal waterways to cross the continental U.S. twice. The rivers don't show up in the story Kentucky tells about itself. Fact 6. In 1811, a massive earthquake in western Kentucky reversed the flow of the Mississippi River for several hours. The New Madrid seismic zone, still active, runs directly under the western tip of the state. Geologists estimate a repeat event would be felt from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. The last time it fired, it created a lake. Fact 7. Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system on Earth. But known is doing enormous work in that sentence. Explorers have mapped 426 miles. Models suggest the actual system may extend over 600 miles, connecting to cave networks in neighboring counties that haven't been physically linked yet. Kentucky doesn't just have a cave, it has an underground country, and less than 40% of it has ever been seen by human eyes. Fact 8. There's a forest in eastern Kentucky that has been continuously burning underground for over 45 years. A coal seam fire ignited beneath an abandoned mine and has been slowly consuming the earth from the inside, occasionally collapsing surface terrain above it. No community was evacuated, no federal emergency declared. It burns while people drive above it every single day. Fact 9. Kentucky has a time zone border that splits not just counties, but a single incorporated city. The city of Casey sits technically in both the central and eastern time zones, depending on which street you stand on. Residents have reported missing school buses, court dates, and medical appointments because of it. 1 zip code, 2 presents. Fact 10. The Daniel Boone National Forest contains a rock formation called the Red River Gorge, a canyon system so topographically distinct it has its own weather microclimate. Fog appears inside the gorge when the surrounding hills are clear. It rains inside when the sky above is blue. The gorge makes its own weather. Meteorologists don't model it. Fact 11. Kentucky produces 95% of the world's bourbon. But for most of its history, over half the state's counties were legally dry. Some still are. The state that built an entire global identity around whiskey contains communities where possessing it is still a misdemeanor. The economic engine runs on a product its own citizens are legally forbidden to consume. Fact 12. The land between the lakes, a peninsula created when the U.S. government flooded 2 river valleys in the 1960s, displaced over 2,700 families. Those families were given 90 days to leave. Their cemeteries are still there, underwater. Families still hold annual decoration days at the water's edge, honoring graves they can no longer reach. The federal government created a recreation area. The locals call it a graveyard. Fact 13. Eastern Kentucky sits on top of some of the most geologically ancient rock in North America. Pre-Appalachian basement rock over 300 million years old. But the soil on top of it is some of the most erosion vulnerable in the eastern U.S., thanks to a century of strip mining. The mountains here are simultaneously some of the oldest and most rapidly disappearing terrain in the country. They are ancient and vanishing at the same time. Fact 14. There's a stretch of the Cumberland River in southern Kentucky that flows north, one of the few rivers in the eastern U.S. that reverses expected direction due to a geological fold. It confused early surveyors so badly that Kentucky's southern border was drawn 58 miles further north than intended by the original survey. Tennessee has disputed this line for 200 years. The river's direction is still confusing cartographers. Fact 15. Mammoth Cave's ecosystem includes 130 species found nowhere else on Earth. Not rare, not endangered, nowhere else. Cave fish with no eyes, spiders with no pigment, organisms that have evolved in complete darkness for so long they've discarded every adaptation that requires light. Evolution happened here, on mute. Still with us? Good, because fact 22 is the one geographers argue about in closed rooms. Fact 16. The Breaks Interstate Park, on the Kentucky-Virginia border, contains a canyon deeper than most of the Grand Canyon's side gorges. It is the deepest gorge east of the Mississippi River. Most Americans have never heard of it. The Grand Canyon has 6 million visitors a year. The Breaks gets 600,000, and most of them don't know what they're standing next to. Fact 17. Kentucky's knobs, a ring of conical hills that encircle the bluegrass region, are not random geography. They are the eroded remnants of an ancient plateau, stripped away over millions of years, leaving these isolated peaks as tombstones marking where the landscape used to be. You are not looking at hills. You are looking at what's left after everything else was eaten by time. The bluegrass sits inside the skeleton of a vanished highland. Fact 18. The Big Sandy River, which forms Kentucky's eastern border with West Virginia, has moved. Not metaphorically, physically. In some places, the actual river channel has migrated so far from its 19th century position that legal property lines now sit in the middle of dry land. People own riverbank that no longer touches water. The border is still where the river used to be. Fact 19. Kentucky has a town called Possum Trot, but the geography around it is stranger than the name. It sits at the intersection of 3 distinct geological zones: the Jackson Purchase, geologically part of the Gulf Coastal Plain, the Pennyroyal Plateau, and the Western Coalfields. 3 completely different geological histories meet at a single crossroads. The continent's seams are visible there, if you know what you're looking at. Fact 20. The Western Kentucky coal field sits on top of the 3rd largest coal deposit ever mapped in North America. A seam system so vast that if you stacked it vertically, it would exceed the height of Everest. The rock beneath rural Kentucky contains more stored carbon than most countries have ever burned in their entire industrial history. This is not a mine. It is a continent's fossil diary. And Kentucky has been tearing out the pages since 1820. Fact 21. There's a geographical phenomenon unique to the central bluegrass region. The soil is so saturated with calcium from the limestone beneath it that grass here literally grows differently. The calcium content of Kentucky bluegrass is measurably higher than the same species grown anywhere else. Thoroughbred horses raised on it develop denser, more calcium-rich bones than horses raised on identical diets elsewhere. The land doesn't just feed the horses, it builds them. Fact 22. Kentucky has a documented geographical paradox called the Jackson Purchase anomaly. This far western sliver of the state, purchased from the Chickasaw Nation in 1818, is not geologically connected to the rest of Kentucky. The rock beneath it belongs to the same formation as Mississippi and Tennessee. Kentucky drew a political line across geography that nature never drew. The purchase belongs physically to a different state. Fact 23. In the 1930s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers straightened and channelized dozens of Kentucky's smaller rivers to prevent flooding. Those rivers have spent the last 80 years trying to return to their original curves. They are succeeding. In several locations, rivers that were turned into straight canals have re-meandered, bending themselves back toward their pre-1930 paths against all engineering effort. Fact 24. The Redbird River Corridor in southeastern Kentucky experiences a meteorological event called a temperature inversion canyon, where cold air sinks and traps warm air above it so severely that frost forms on valley floors in late May. Communities in the valley floor experience a last frost date nearly 6 weeks later than communities 300 feet above them on the ridgeline. Neighbors separated by a 10-minute walk live in different growing seasons. The mountain doesn't just divide land, it divides time. Fact 25. Kentucky's cave ecosystem contains an underground river, the Echo River inside Mammoth Cave, that has never been fully mapped. Explorers in the 19th century reported the river disappearing into passages too small to follow. Modern sonar suggests the channel continues for at least another 30 miles before connecting with a surface water source. The river has a mouth. No one has found its source. Fact 26. The town of Middlesboro, Kentucky is the only city in the United States built inside a meteor impact crater. The crater, formed 300 million years ago, is 3.7 miles wide. The residents built their grid streets, their courthouse, their homes directly on the compressed rock left by an object that arrived from space. Middlesboro is not a city on Earth. It is a city on a wound. Fact 27. There's a spot in western Kentucky, the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers at Ballard County, where 3 states meet in the water. But the lines have never been formally agreed upon by all 3 states simultaneously. Kentucky, Illinois, and Missouri all have slightly different official claims to where their borders intersect. 3 American states share a point that legally does not exist. Fact 28. Eastern Kentucky's Black Mountain, the highest point in the state at 4,145 feet, is not geologically Appalachian. It belongs to a subrange called the Pine Mountain Thrust Fault, where the Earth literally slid. A massive slab of crust moved 18 miles horizontally over millions of years and stacked on top of younger rock. Black Mountain is sitting on a geological lie. It is not where it was born. Fact 29. Kentucky has a region called the Purchase that experiences tornado frequency comparable to parts of Oklahoma and Kansas, yet receives almost no federal weather monitoring infrastructure. It is statistically one of the most tornado-vulnerable populated regions in the U.S., with the least dedicated storm warning infrastructure per square mile. The sirens exist. The data doesn't. Fact 30. In 1984, a landslide in eastern Kentucky buried a road, redirected a creek, and created a new pond. All in 11 minutes. No earthquake, no flood. Just rain-saturated soil on a slope that had been undermined by subsurface mining. The mining company's permits showed no subsurface work within a mile of the site. The permits were wrong. The mountain moved anyway. Fact 31. Kentucky's bluegrass region sits inside a geological formation called the Cincinnati Arch, a dome of ancient rock that has been slowly rising for 400 million years. Not stopped, slowly rising. The center of Kentucky is, technically, still going up. The state is not flat. It is ascending. Strong 32. There's a creek in Boyd County, Kentucky, that changes its name 3 times within 4 miles. Not because of historical accidents, because 3 different communities in 3 different centuries named it independently, not knowing the others existed. The creek has no idea. It flows through all 3 names without pausing. Geography doesn't require consensus. Fact 33. Kentucky has a documented lost river system. The Barren River's tributaries in the Pennyroyal region disappear into sinkholes and flow underground for miles before resurfacing. Early settlers found rivers on their maps that they could never locate. The rivers were there. They were just below the surface. Some of those underground routes have still never been traced end to end. Fact 34. The knob landscape surrounding the bluegrass creates a bowl effect that traps cold air in winter and humid heat in summer more severely than the surrounding regions. Louisville, which sits at the edge of this geographic bowl, regularly records temperatures 8 to 12 degrees warmer than rural areas 30 miles south, purely due to topography amplifying the urban heat effect. The city is hotter than the countryside, not because of the city, because of the hills. Fact 35. Kentucky is simultaneously one of America's most resource-rich and most economically distressed states. It contains the longest cave, the most bourbon, $1 trillion of extracted coal, and per capita income rankings that place several of its eastern counties below the poverty line of some developing nations. The wealth came out of the ground. It did not stay. Kentucky didn't lose its resources. It exported them and received poverty in return. Fact 36. Eastern Kentucky has been experiencing a population collapse so severe that entire school districts have lost 40 to 60% of their enrollment in 20 years. When a school district empties, the geographic knowledge encoded in a community, the local names, the watershed histories, the land memory, disappears with the children. Kentucky isn't just losing people, it's losing the language it used to describe itself. The geography will outlast the words for it. Fact 37. The Cumberland Gap, the mountain pass through which 300,000 settlers entered the American frontier, is being physically altered by a highway tunnel drilled through it in 1996. The tunnel rerouted US 25E away from the surface pass. The gap itself, the actual historical notch in the mountain, is now unreachable by car. 300,000 people walked through it. Today, almost no one does. The tunnel made the most important doorway in American history a detour. Fact 38. Lake Cumberland, one of the largest man-made lakes in the eastern U.S., has been slowly draining since 2007, when the Army Corps of Engineers discovered critical structural failures in Wolf Creek Dam. The lake was drawn down 40 to 50 feet as an emergency precaution. At full drawdown, marina docks floated in midair. Houseboats sat on mud. The lake is now maintained as a controlled, half-full basin, an inland sea held together by a repair job that engineers describe as ongoing. Fact 39. Climate models project that Kentucky's eastern coal counties, already experiencing accelerating land subsidence from decades of underground mining, will face compound collapse risk as rainfall intensity increases. Subsurface voids plus increased water pressure plus slope degradation equals terrain that begins to move. Entire hollows, communities of hundreds tucked into narrow mountain valleys with no alternate exit route, sit above mined-out earth in a state that receives 50 inches of rain per year. The mountains are not permanent, and some of the people living under them don't have anywhere else to go. Fact 40. Mammoth Cave has not stopped growing. Speleologists have documented new passage formation, water still actively dissolving new voids, still collapsing new chambers, still extending the longest known cave on Earth. Every year, Kentucky gets a little more hollow. The state is eating itself from the inside, quietly, in the dark. And what it's building down there, it hasn't finished yet. And somewhere underneath Kentucky right now, a river is carving a passage no human will find for 1,000 years. A hillside is moving a millimeter. A coal seam is burning in the dark. The maps say Kentucky is known. The maps are wrong. Geography isn't settled. It isn't history. It's pressure. It's water. It's time.